I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet whenever and wherever you are. My name is Joe DeMar, and I'm here with my incredible co-host,
Rebecca Wood, I think.
Yes, so together, Rebecca and I
Thank you.
will be bringing you a fantastic hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your pets and your plants in your garden and your lawn and the trees that you see as you walk down the sidewalk, and pretty much everybody and everything, because all of us are wrapped up together on this one tiny little speck of a ball in outer space called the planet Earth. And we got a great show for you today. We're going to chat for just a little while more, and you can call in at any time at 877-909-1007. And then we're going to have a guest on. Our good friend Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear is going to be talking to us, because they are taking on the powers. They have filed a really important lawsuit that will protect you and your family from getting irradiated. So we really want to talk to him about that. Then we'll hear from our wonderful advertisers and patrons. And then Rebecca will talk to us about what exactly, Rebecca?
Tulip trees.
Tulip trees, a very pretty kind of topic. Then we have ecological news, and man, there's a whole bunch of it this week. Wow, just a lot of big stuff happening on the environment front. So that's our show, and as I say, hopefully at some point we'll hear from you at 877-909-1007. And this morning, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's happened over in Germany. Of course, they're suffering because the Russians have cut off their supply of gas, of methane, and winter's coming up, and it looks like they're going to have an energy shortage. And so they've decided to, their plan has been for many, many years to shut down all their nuclear power plants. They started in on this back 10 years ago after the Fukushima disaster. Actually, they started before that, and then they stopped because the right-wing government under Angela Merkel said, "Oh no, we'll keep the nukes running." And then Fukushima happened, and she was like, "Oh, actually, we'll get rid of the nukes after all." So they've been going on this slow, steady pace of shutting down nukes while building up wind and solar, but they didn't go fast enough to be able to meet all their energy needs, with Russia suddenly cutting off all the natural gas unexpectedly. So the wonderful Greta Thunberg made a terrible statement this past week. She said that rather than restarting coal plants, which is what Germany is going to have to do to make up for the natural gas that got cut off. They should just keep their nukes running past the deadline, past the closure date.
It was a less than ideal statement that may have been interpreted in a terrible way.
Yeah,
Possibly.
I mean, she gave an opinion, but it wasn't an informed opinion, because what has happened in Germany since they've shut down so many of their nuke plants and they've built up so much wind and solar, the contributions of those 4 nuke plants now all going all full blast is only 6% of Germany's electricity needs. And so even if they totally reversed themselves and just said, oh no, we're going to keep these running after all, it's only going to provide a fraction of the energy they're going to need to make up for all the gas that Russia has cut off. So they would still have to restart their coal plants. So it came from she got baited by an interviewer and she took the bait. And what's happened, unfortunately, since then is that the right in Germany and the pro-nukers around the world have just, exploded and say, Greta Thunberg's on our side. She supports nukes, which isn't at all true. She never said, I support nuclear power. In fact, up until now, she's been uncategorically opposed to nuclear power. But my experience with pro-nukers is you give them an inch and they'll contaminate 1,000 square miles.
Yep.
And so I have an anti-nuclear Twitter account, and I have just been pummeled mercilessly by all these pro-nukers saying, hey, Greta's on our side now. And I still have to go back over and, then it emboldens them to repeat all the lies, the lies that no one has ever been hurt by nuclear waste in the world ever.
I think they have.
Yeah, lots and lots of people have. And a number have been killed directly by it. So, I have to go back and re-show the same Wikipedia articles again, here's the people who got killed by nuclear waste. And it's just, it's just terrible that we follow leaders so much that when they make a mistake or when they get quoted out of context, which is what happened to Greta Thunberg, it just warps the entire debate, and people are ready to throw out their reason and just follow that leader. So,
but it's so rare to sort of see someone.
All right, we'll
articulating
put you on
a
and,
really
we'll get
progressive
the
point of
starting
view
run. So stand
sometimes
by
that we
and,
latch
let's
on
have
to them,
fun.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
I mean,
Okay.
once somebody manages to get through all the blockages and get onto the world stage and has a voice, when they start saying pro environment stuff, the tendency is to just accept them and follow them no matter what they say, or how they say it. And in this case, Greta Thunberg did not say it well. I mean, she gave her opinion, but the people in Germany, like the Greens, for example, who've been fighting nuclear power for decades and are, this is the year, 2022 is supposed to be the last year that there's any nuclear power in Germany. And that's the culmination of literally 30 or 40 years of people putting everything they've got into blocking them. And this is also the year that it was proved conclusively how right they are, because of what's happening over in the Ukraine, where the nuke plants are constantly getting their power cut off and they have to go back to their emergency diesel generators, which, if Russia cuts off the supply of diesel to those diesel generators, will fail, and then they'll have meltdowns, and we'll have yet another Chernobyl style disaster.
There's the thing about nuclear power. It's great until anything goes wrong.
Right.
Any sort of natural disaster, even a little one, any sort of war, in the one case, I remember Fernald in the 80s, which is like a nuclear dumping site, basically for used fuel in southern Ohio or central Ohio, I believe.
Yeah, southwestern Ohio. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At one point, they said they were worried about the domes because excess buildup of snow on these concrete domes could cause them to collapse and release radiation. It's like, God help us if a squirrel takes a crap on one of those,
Yeah, that's the thing about nuclear power. It works great until it fails catastrophically.
Yeah.
I mean, you could even look at Fukushima and said, look, they didn't have a meltdown for like 30 years, and then they only had the one. So it's like,
Just one little meltdown.
yeah, well, I mean,
Which-
technically it was four. There were four
Right.
plants that melted down, but you know my point, and that's how pro-nukers look at it. Believe it or not, they don't look at the horrible catastrophe at the end. They look at the 30 years of power that they got before the horrible catastrophe. So, yeah, it's kind of like people who are addicted gamblers. If you talk to them, they always win, because they only remember the jackpots that they win. They don't remember that, they actually lost money because they put more money in and lost many, many more times than they did the one win. So, I don't know. But speaking of wins and losses, we have someone on the line who is going to be fighting a huge court battle that, for all our sakes, we better hope and pray that he wins. That's Kevin Camps. Kevin, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. So, if we could just start once again with your name and who you're with.
My name is Kevin Camps, and I serve as radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear. We're based in Tacoma Park, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C.
Great. And thanks for coming on the show again. It's been a while. I think it was like March was the last time we had you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, you folks, along with a bunch of others, have decided to challenge something in court here, a very important court battle. What exactly who exactly are you? I mean, who are the other organizations in this battle with you, and what exactly are you fighting?
Yeah, so Beyond Nuclear, which is a nuclear power and nuclear weapons watchdog, has partnered up with Ohio Nuclear Free Network, which is a statewide anti-nuclear coalition. And we have two great pro bono attorneys, Terry Lodge of Toledo and Wally Taylor of Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
We know
And
Terry.
the issue is I'm sorry?
We know Terry. He likes dogs.
Okay. Yep. That Terry. Yep. He even had a security dog on board for his oral arguments last Thursday in D.C. Came all the way down with him. So the issue is Portsmouth, Ohio, which is a more than half-century-old U.S. Department of Energy major nuclear weapons and nuclear power site. It's a joint site for both sides of that nuclear coin. It engages and has engaged in uranium enrichment for decades for both weapons and reactor fuel. And so what we're challenging specifically is kind of an experiment, but with very high stakes. It's called high-assay, low-enriched uranium. So instead of only enriching uranium-235 in reactor fuel up to a 3% or 5%, or more recently 10% concentration, what they're trying to do with this scheme is to go up to essentially 20% or even over 20%. The problem with this is that at 20% concentration of uranium-235, you're borderline weapons grade. It's considered high-enriched uranium at that point. And to go even further up to even 90%, which is weapons grade, doesn't take much more work in terms of the uranium centrifuges that do the enrichment. So they're really playing with fire. And so the legal challenges specifically are violations of the National Environmental Policy Act that the decision makers, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which approves the license for this activity to go forward because it's supposedly commercial, the U.S. Department of Energy itself, which of course controls our weapons arsenal, have not looked at the environmental impacts of nuclear weapons proliferation, for example. Another important thing, the whole uranium fuel chain, if they go forward with this at a commercial scale, which is what they hope to do beyond the experiment, it's going to have huge impacts on indigenous peoples communities out west and all over the country and perhaps in other countries because that's where the uranium is mined and milled. And there's also the risk of terrorism or sabotage because this is potentially weapons-grade material, so it's going to be an attractive target for malevolent actors. And maybe the last point I'll make is just that weapons proliferation potential. This is going to be a green light. If it's okay for the U.S. to do it, then why couldn't others do it around the world? So as the United States tries to export so-called small modular reactors or so-called advanced new reactor designs that would use this high assay, low enriched uranium fuel, those are the kind of risks that this means, and they've just taken huge shortcuts on even going through the proper processes like National Environmental Policy Act, hard look requirements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned malevolent actors there. I think one thing that has been like thrown back in the face of the world community is just how these things can shift so quickly that I mean, right before Russia invaded Ukraine, they were trading partners. You know, they had all kinds of economic agreements, and you know, even back in the Obama days, it looked like Russia was going to be just like it was all friends again. You know, in terms of, but then you know things shift around on the international stage, economically, ecologically, the way they do, and now all of a sudden there's this really malevolent actor, you know, and there's this huge conflict between two countries where there hadn't been one, and that can happen. I mean, history, if history tells us nothing else, it can tell us that enemies become friends, friends become enemies, you know, people appear out of nowhere, groups and terrorist groups, and you know, there's all kinds of potential. As long as you've got humans, there's going to be some malevolent actors. There's going to be enemies that might want to take a resource like enriched uranium and turn it into a weapon. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I'm reminded of a U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission public comment session that took place in Perrysburg, Ohio. Would have been 2013 or so. It was called Nuclear Waste Confidence, and we called it the Nuke Waste Con Game. So they had been forced under court order at the U.S. NRC to finally, after many decades of high-level radioactive waste generation by atomic reactors, consider the impacts of that on the environment. We forced them to through court order. And so they're holding these sessions around the country, and, you know, a bunch of us showed up at Perrysburg. And the point that I made during my comments, because the NRC was up there saying, it's all fine, there's no problem, and you know, the threat of war, like you're saying, came to my mind. And it was, you know, why it was because it was the 200th anniversary of the War of 1812, which had raged in all these places in Ohio. And I just made the point that was just 200 years ago. Seems like a long time to us many times, but it's not in relation to how long high-level radioactive waste is hazardous and deadly, which is forever. Okay, I exaggerate, only a million years into the future. So the question is, wherever this stuff is stored, you mentioned Fernald and too much snow. I mean, wherever this stuff is stored, if anything goes wrong during the course of that million years, and I mean anything, you know, it could be a war, it could be extreme weather, it could be something as simple as rust and corrosion. You're going to unleash this stuff into the environment, and it's going to do tremendous harm to humans and all living things. So we really probably shouldn't be making it in the first place, right? This planet's too small, too fragile for this ultra-hazardous material. And the industry and the NRC and the DOE would like you to just not even think about it, because what could possibly go wrong? Except, like you said, Joe, things go wrong all the time. It's scary how often things go wrong.
Yeah.
So now I think you guys are involved in another legal action, but aren't you folks involved in also contesting the idea of the interim waste storage that they're trying to set up down there in Texas?
Okay.
That's even a bigger part of my soul right now. It's been a 6+ year fight, and that's an understatement, because this is just the latest round of the federal government and the nuclear industry trying to locate these consolidated interim storage facilities for high-level radioactive waste.
And let me just remind the listeners, one reason we're paying so much attention to this is that if this goes through, there's going to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of shipments of this highly radioactive waste which will likely irradiate you at some point. I mean, when I say you, I mean anyone who's listening to this show, because having all these radioactive trucks and train cars traveling through the country means a lot of people are going to get zapped by radiation. But okay, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, we're fighting two of these dumps at the same time right now. One's on the Texas side of the New Mexico state line by a whopping 0.37 miles, so it's right on the state line between Texas and New Mexico. And that one's the one that's really first and foremost in front of us. We have oral arguments at the same court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, on November 10th. That's coming right up. And again, Terry Lodge represents a 7-group national environmental grassroots coalition in that fight, including Don't Waste Michigan. And Wally Taylor, who I mentioned before from Iowa, he's the attorney representing the Sierra Club in these dump fights. Beyond Nuclear's in there with Diane Curran as our legal counsel and Mindy Goldstein as well. And it's strange bedfellows because I mentioned the Texas dump. There's a second dump. It's called Holtec International. It's only 40 miles west of the Texas dump, further into New Mexico. So one of our strange bedfellows is an oil company. Oil and natural gas and ranching is their business. It's a family-owned company called Fasken that's more than 100 years old. And wouldn't you know that these dumps would be right on top of their mineral interests, for one thing, as well as their ranching interests. So that's an interesting partnership there, fighting the dump. We don't agree with them in terms of their oil and their natural gas activities, but we're on the same side of fighting the dump. And what that's meant is that none other than Ruby Red, Texas, in the person of the governor, the attorney general, the congressional delegation, the state legislature, has been persuaded, mostly, I'd say, by this oil company and other oil companies impacted to join this fight. And then, just to show how broad this coalition is, in New Mexico, which is really liberal Democrat, we've got pretty much the entire state on our side as well. Governor, attorney general, congressional delegation, state legislature. So you've really got this pitched battle of these two states against the nuclear industry and the companies involved, but also the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which rubber stamps all these things. So the fight is on, and we've got oral arguments November 10th against the Texas dump, and then the New Mexico dump. The NRC is probably going to rubber stamp that license in January, and then the court battle on that's going to take off in a great big hurry. So we're just fighting this pitched legal battle, and like you said, Joe, this impacts the whole country in terms of the transportation. So the gamma radiation and the neutron radiation, even if nothing goes wrong, will be emanating out, being emitted out to a distance of a half mile on either side of the train tracks or the highway, whichever transport mode it's taking, even barge shipments. So you're going to get a hazardous dose. I mean, a small but nonetheless hazardous dose of gamma and neutron radiation, even if nothing's going wrong, like mobile X-ray machines that can't be turned off. But if there's a severe accident or attack that breaches the container, now the impacts are more like 50 miles in either direction. And that could include particulate and gases and even liquids. And so these are, our slogan is mobile Chernobyl or floating Fukushimas, dirty bombs on wheels. These are high-risk activities, and it makes no sense to take them all the way out to the Permian Basin in the Southwest for a temporary storage configuration, and then perhaps bring them right back through the same places they passed through the first time en route to a permanent geologic repository, because we don't know where that's going to be. So that's why we're fighting this so hard.
Well, good. I mean, it makes no sense, but there are entities which would stand to benefit enormously from doing this, and that's specifically the electric utility companies that have generated this waste that are right now bearing the expense of watching it and making sure it doesn't explode and melt down.
They want it off their ledger books. They want to transfer the liability onto the U.S. Department of Energy, which means the taxpayers. So, it makes sense from their perspective, but It doesn't make sense from the perspective of the American public. I mean, what's crazy is that permanent geologic disposal dump that I mentioned, that is inescapably, unfortunately, the responsibility of the American taxpayer. The U.S. federal government kind of sold us down the river on that many decades ago, and we can't get out of it. The permanent disposal, an unprecedented subsidy to an industry, in this case, the nuclear power industry. But this interim storage part, that was supposed to be the industry's problem from the start. That was the trade-off. We'll take care of permanent disposal. You're still responsible for interim storage. Now they're trying to foist that onto the public, and these dump companies would make a killing. But the real driver behind it all is the nuclear power industry just trying to foist its liability onto the public as soon as possible instead of waiting for that permanent repository.
Right. Even though in terms of the amount of time that the wastes they've created are going to need to be watched, I mean, this is literally less than the tick of a stopwatch. I mean, you know, they couldn't suck it up and take care of their wastes even for, you know, a decade or two, even though what they've generated is going to be dangerous and able to kill people for, you know, a million years, as you've said.
And as
So,
often
all right.
as they say how safe it is, they know full well how dangerous it is, and that's why they're so desperate to foist it off before something happens that they're responsible for.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, I've been getting hammered on Twitter by people saying, "Oh, you know, nuclear wastes are incredibly safe. They've never hurt anybody." And as you say, that the companies that are generating it do know and understand full well that it's incredibly dangerous and deadly. And that's why if it wasn't, why would they be so eager to create this interim storage thing? Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, that's one of the points is if it's so safe where it's at, then why do you need to move it?
Yeah,
You know?
just leave it.
But it's
Right.
not safe where it's at. It's not safe on the roads, and it's not safe at these proposed dump sites.
All right, Kevin. Well, if people want to hook up with you folks and watch how you're doing on these battles that you're waging on our behalf, I might add, you know, how would they do that?
Well, our website is www.beyondnuclear.org. And if folks have questions, they can email me at kevin@beyondnuclear.org.
All right, great. Thanks so much for coming on, Kevin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right. That was Kevin Camps. And again, Beyond Nuclear, fighting the good fight. And, you know, one of the things that's been happening in these Twitter battles is anti-nuclear activists, they're accusing us of being bankrolled by the fossil fuel industry. And nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, if you look at the budgets of some of these organizations that have been fighting nuclear power for decades, the first thing to come to mind is how could they possibly be doing that with so little money? I mean, really, shoestring is generous. I mean, they've managed to battle the multi-billion-dollar nuclear industry to a standstill with like half a shoestring. And the reason, of course, is that truth is actually on their side. And so when they do manage to get to court and do manage to lay it all out in front of a judge over and over again, judges say, "Oh, you know what, anti-nuclear folks, you're right." And all this stuff that the pro-nuclear people are saying, that's not true at all. And so that's the only reason they've been so effective at holding nuclear power plants to 100 when, you know, Nixon, tricky Dick there back in the early 70s, he envisioned literally tens of thousands of nuclear power plants all over the country. And we stopped him, but we stopped him with almost no resources, mostly with volunteer labor. And it's just an incredible story of democracy and human power versus the economic and political power that these.
And of course, even supposing it was true, nuclear has no corporate backing at all. No, they're pure as the driven snow.
Oh yeah, right. They're funded solely by, you know, the little 25 cents a month that little old ladies put aside from their Social Security check.
Right, that's how that happens.
Yeah, no, they get billions and billions in both government and corporate subsidy, I might add. So, all right, well, that's time to move on, though, and move on to more pleasant things, such as a discussion of our advertisers and patrons. For Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's several ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. You can also go to their website, which is wcparks.org, and you can download their app. Go to any app store and search for WC Parks. And of course, they're on all the social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc., etc., etc. And I do want to announce they're doing a fun thing that they do every year, and that is the superhero eco caching hunt. And so what you do is go to their website, and they have a list of parks, and if you go to each of those parks during a certain period of time over the next month and a half or so, there's a superhero battle going on in those parks, and you follow the geocaching clues, and you'll find out how you can participate on the good guy side. You'd be on the superhero side. It's not like some video games let you do this.
You have to be?
I suppose you could try being on the supervillain side. But today is the last day actually for the first of these superhero geo-chase events, and you've got to go to their new park, the one that's in Perrysburg there that used to be a quarry, Sawyer Quarry. So it's a beautiful day to get out to Sawyer Quarry, so I'd recommend it. For Green Future is also brought to you by our incredible patrons. And these are people who really do set aside a little bit of money every month to help make this show happen. They've gone to patreon.com, Patreon, searched for Green Future, up popped our wonderful Patreon page, and they chose the level of membership that matched their budget. And I want to especially thank all the patrons who had been kicked off by Patreon in the last couple months. They've all come back now. So we really appreciate you guys taking the effort to get past the bureaucracy and keep continuing to make this show possible. And one reason we're so grateful is because of our little, every week we hear from Rebecca about a natural topic. And Rebecca, what are we talking about this week?
We're doing tulip trees this week because I took some out-of-town guests yesterday to the Woodlawn Cemetery on the corner of Central and Jackman on Toledo, which I recommend people check out. It's got glorious Victorian and Edwardian architecture of the tombs, and they got a little fake river that they made out of a ditch, and a fancy bridge over it, which is not in great shape. We were a little nervous crossing it, but it's allegedly safe for pedestrians, but not for cars. Alrighty then. But yeah, it was really beautiful. It's also Class 2 Arboretum, I have learned. I'm assuming either 1 or 3 is high. Although maybe 10 is high, and it's actually a terrible, but it looks good. It looks like a good art. It has a lot of trees. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's pretty high up on the Arboretum scale.
Yeah, it's real pretty there, in all seriousness. And my uncle found a mulberry and a tulip tree there. So yeah, tulip trees are apparently from the genus Liriodendron, which has only 2 species in it. And they're large deciduous trees, and they have large flowers which superficially resemble tulips, which you're only going to see them superficially from a great distance because they're very tall trees. I have learned. They are in the magnolia family. They're also called tulip poplars, yellow poplars, and go by various other nicknames. They're not at all closely related to poplars, though. So the North American, one of these genres, the North American tulipifera, I guess, unless I got the accent on the wrong syllable. And then there's also the Chinese and Vietnamese chinense. So that would be Liriodendron tulipifera versus Liriodendron chinense. more or
Okay.
less. The North American variety can reach 192 feet,
Wow.
and they're famous, especially in Appalachia, for sticking up above the rest of the trees. Like there'll be your nice sort of little homogeneous tree canopy, and then sticking right up through it for a few feet higher is the tulip tree. um, they have allopatric speciation, which are just one of our new words for the day here, vocabulary words, which means that it's speciation produced by isolation of populations, as opposed to they're staying in the same area but they're competing for different niches is another kind. I don't know, there's probably other kinds of speciation. But they can still hybridize apparently, and they hybridize pretty easily, including with each other, the two species. Although the North American tulipifera is used more in horticulture, apparently, but the other is gaining popularity. Apparently, the major difference is that you can see is that the North American tulipifera has sort of an orange tinted flower, whereas the Chinense are pretty much green. And one of the reasons I included them is if you are not good at identifying trees, and you can't tell whether things are pinnate or palmate or lobed or what the heck is going on, this is a good tree for you, because really not very many other trees have tulip-shaped flowers, at least for part of the year. So it's a good. You can gain some confidence by learning to identify this tree, because it's not that hard. Mostly they're deciduous, but there are a couple of semi-evergreen varieties in Florida and Yunnan province. So they don't have winters. They don't lose their leaves, I guess. They interestingly, well, it's pretty logical. They get taller in groups. So when you got a little grove of them, they're going to compete with each other. Whereas if they're just standing out in a field by themselves, they don't bother. They're the tallest thing around. Why grow?
Mm-hmm. Smart.
Interestingly, they smell like cucumbers, apparently. Did not know this. And they're very common in something called Appalachian cove forests. And they're especially tall and wide trees. And like cove forest, I didn't know about these. They're Appalachian cove forests. A cove means valley, or like a high valley, like a high mountain valley. So yeah, if you see something, it sounds all nice and covey, but it's way the heck up in the mountains. It's common for people to settle and build houses in coves also. But yeah, a cove forest, they're found in protected positions, second vocabulary word, in middle to lower elevations, and they have a really high species richness in terms of plants and animals. A lot of different stuff in there. It's a way to see a lot of different species of plants and animals fast. And one of the greatest populations of tulip trees over 20 feet would be in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. In particular, if you go there, ask somebody for directions to something called the Sag Branch Giant, which is a really legendarily tall tulip tree.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear they're a native species, because I've always liked them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Thanks for that report on tulip trees.
You're welcome.
Okay, so now it's time to go on to ecological news, and got a lot of ecological news. Unfortunately, we've got to start out with a kind of a depressing story. World Wildlife Fund has come out with their annual Living Planet report, and this year they looked at what's been happening with animal populations. And since 1970, you may have actually heard this one on the mainstream media. It was so bad it actually got a little bit of attention. Animal populations are down by 70% since 1970. This is wild
Crud.
animals. Yeah.
Creep and crawl and crud.
Right. This is not our cows and our pigs and our feedlots.
Yeah.
No, this is all wild animals. On average, the populations are reduced by 70% since 1970. The worst place in the world for this is Latin America, where they've actually lost 94% of the animals. And they're what's happening. The biggest cause is when the habitat is getting torn down in order to plant agricultural stuff. And so what's happened in Latin America, they cut down the forests and then they grow the crops that feed the animals that we then eat. And so this is really, there's a direct line from your hamburger to the extinction of animals in Latin America. And so, eat less of that. I'm not saying give up all meat, but we've got to slow it down, because another part of this report says that the earth, that we are using up the earth at, let's see here, where's that exact number? We're exceeding the capacity of the planet by 75%. So in other words, we're eating 1 3/4 worth of planet every year when we've only got one planet. and obviously the planet had some reserves, when we started on this huge teardown of the wild world back since 1970. At that point we had reserves built up, but essentially what we've been doing is eating those reserves. And so it's kind of like if you were getting like a monthly Social Security check and you had a retirement account, and together there's enough there, you get enough every year, and you could take a little bit out of your account, you'd have enough to live the rest of your life without having to worry about money. Well, what we're doing is we're taking the monthly check, and we're taking huge chunks out of our savings, which are rapidly dwindling, and we're going to run out of money before we run out of life here. So it's not good. 2.5% of animal species have gone extinct since 1970. They looked at 32,000 species, and they divided the populations up somewhat. So like freshwater species, things like the Amazon dolphins, for example, they're suffering the most. That's 83% of freshwater species are dying, are on the way out. And biodiversity, intactness is declining. In other words, the number of species that were in an area back in 1970 compared to now, on average around the world, has declined by 77%. Now we're a little better than that, than the world's average. Our biodiversity in this part of the world has only declined by 25%, but it's still bad. We could say, oh, we're not as bad as some places. True, but we've lost 25% of our biodiversity, so in just 50 years. So this is not good. Not all species are declining. Some species that are increasing, though, are parasitic organisms, and and
Not what you want.
and things like beetles that eat trees. Those species are actually on the increase, which is not a good thing. So
ask yourself, do you like parasites? Do you want more of them? No? Well, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. then and they also put 60% of the blame of all this ecosystem degradation they put on carbon emissions, because they are changing the climate, and that is wiping out species. And it's important to remember, they gave the example of the bats in Australia. They had a sort of a bat there that they had one day where the temperature just went off the scale, and they lost 45,000 bats in that one day. And a similar thing is happening in British Columbia right now, where they're having an incredible heat wave for October in British Columbia. It's 75 degrees. But the thing is, it also hasn't rained there in 3 months. And so there's pictures on the internet that millions of salmon have came back up the streams, as they do to spawn every year, and then those streams literally dried out from under them. And
also,
so,
are they going to have bad fires now? It sounds like they might.
that also happens.
Dry and hot is a bad combination for fire.
Right. And as we know, they've been cutting down their forests, because we've been reporting on that. So you cut down the forests, you get less rain. Now the remaining forests are available for fire. It's all positive feedback loops that we have to stop. And so so that's the first story, is that basically the World Wildlife Fund says we're messing up big time, and they got all kinds of charts and graphs. It's a 60-page report. I didn't read every word of it, I have to admit, but I'm going to this week. So that came out earlier this week. Next story. So I want to counter that with a little bit of positive news, and that is in Florida, after decades of court battles from groups like the Center for Biological Diversity, the bonneted bats in Florida have received critical habitat protection now. So they are an endangered species. They've been declared endangered since 2013, but that wasn't associated with critical habitat protection. And so they've continued to decline because, they keep putting apartment buildings on their habitat. But now it's gotten so bad that even the Fish and Wildlife Service has agreed, okay, we will protect the habitat of the bonneted bat. And so there's things like, there's a water park in Miami, which ironically has been called, they want to name it the Miami Wilds Water Park, that they were going to take down one of the last remaining forests just north of the city of Miami to put up this huge water park. And now it looks like they're going to be able to block that because it's literally one of the last places that the bonneted bats have habitat. So that's some good news, and that's nice. It's more.
If it was actually wild, there'd be things there that could eat you.
Yeah.
You don't want to go to that water park.
True. Yeah, you don't want to end the water slide in a,
Alligator pit.
Yeah, no, that would not be good. So, now on to another story. This is a lot of judicial stories this week. Austria has agreed, or on October 10th, they have formally sued the European Union over their taxonomy. And we've been covering this story since it began, where the European Union has declared that nuclear power and methane and natural gas are both green investments. And
spoiler alert, they're not.
Yeah, no, they actually aren't. But because of this declaration, they're in line to get tons of money in terms of low-cost loans, and they get a nice green sticker put on their, on their projects, no matter how environmentally destructive they are. And Austria has finally said, screw that, we're taking you to court. And so they're suing them in the European Court of Justice. Interestingly, in the European Union Parliament, both the committees, both the Environment Committee and the Economic Affairs Committee, told the European Parliament members, do not declare nukes and natural gas as green, but they went ahead and did it anyway. And lots and lots of fingerprints from the fossil fuel and nuclear industry all over those EU legislators that passed that. So good on you for Austria for standing up for everybody and fighting against that. And there's already a couple other lawsuits that have been brought by organizations like World Wildlife Fund and NRDC. So hopefully they will prevail, because calling natural gas green, calling nuclear green, is just so obviously insane that let's hope the justices actually met out some justice there. All right, and speaking of justice, as you may know, the Supreme Court is back in session, and as their very first case this year, they heard arguments in something called Sackett versus the EPA. And the Sacketts are a curmudgeonly couple that that decided they wanted to build, they bought some land that was a wetland, and they said, you know what, we want to build on this wetland, screw it. And so they just started dumping gravel in to fill it in, which is illegal. You're not allowed to simply wipe out wetlands because you want to. And so the EPA came along and said, look, you got to stop dumping your gravel in there, take out what you've put in there, and respect this wetland, which is protecting this. There's a big lake right next to the wetland, and so it was helping to keep the water clean. It was providing habitat for the plants and animals that need to live there, to keep the water clean, et cetera, et cetera. And Sacketts were like, no, we're not going to do that. And so they have brought all the way up to the Supreme Court a case based on the idea that the Clean Water Act didn't include wetlands. Yeah, I know. Yeah. No, but I mean, technically the words...
I think wetlands have water in them, don't you?
They do, and that water...
That's why they call them wetlands.
...is connected to the waters...
Because water makes things wet.
Yes, right.
Just explain some basic terms here.
I never put those two together, but wetlands, water.
Yeah.
The phrase used in the actual Clean Water Act is waters of the United States. And the Sacketts are saying, that's not waters. Look at all those plants. And, there's even animals in there, too, that aren't the water. Waters means, big, navigable.
But that's why we were actually concerned about the water, because of the animals and the plants in it.
Yes.
It's not just because we like water a lot,
Right. So the Supreme Court heard arguments on October 4th. They're expected to release their opinion next year. But the mere fact that they were listened to this terrible argument does not bode well for the wetlands in the United States of America, because all that 5 of those 9 have to do, and we know that 6 of the 9 are pretty much just not using their brains when they're making these decisions. All they have to do is say, nope, wetlands are not part of the waters of the United States, no matter how wet they are, and we will lose all our wetlands, because all over the country there's developers that would just love to fill in literally every wetland, and the only thing stopping them is the Clean Water Act. And so if we lose this one, incredible degradation of the quality of water, and this is I have to talk again to the children listening to this, the young people, since I'm the ancient age of 60, before the Clean Water Act, rivers and lakes and streams were so polluted that some of them you would die if you tried to go swimming in them. Some of them were so polluted that they caught fire. Cleveland, the rivers caught fire. They had to spray water on the rivers to put them out, because the fires were actually threatening the bridges that went over the waters, because you can't have rivers burning and have low level bridges underneath them. But I guess the Sacketts and people like them are just like, well, all we need to do is make the bridges higher, and then the rivers can burn, and it won't be a problem.
Yeah.
No. So
I don't know why you didn't think of that solution, Joe.
I probably should have written letters to the editor or something.
Yeah.
But so if the Sacketts get their way, basically the Clean Water Act pretty much gets overturned, because you still won't be able to put your discharge pipe right into Lake Erie or the Cuyahoga River, right into the parts that are deep enough for boats. But you would be able to put those discharge pipes in the parts that are too shallow for boats, and into the wetlands right next to the river,
which is going to end up in the river. So why even have that law at that point? I think that's probably what they're thinking.
Exactly. So we got to watch that one. All right, one more story, and that is I went to a nice presentation at Bowling Green State University by a woman named Mary Catherine Nagel, who's a Native American woman, member of the Cherokee tribe. She gave this very interesting talk called The Sovereignty of Our Stories. And the main thrust to her talk was that the depictions of Native Americans in popular culture and things like plays and movies are what allowed courts and lawmakers to basically relegate Native Americans to second-class status for many, many decades. And thankfully that's changing. And actually she was one of the writers on the current Predator movie, Prey, which is interesting. Now I have to watch it. It's on Hulu, I guess.
It sounds really, really good.
But she also mentioned, and what I'm bringing up here today, right now there is a case before the Supreme Court that deals with sovereignty of Native American tribes. And the particulars of this case are the question of whether or not Native police officers, Native police organizations are able to enforce tribal law against non-natives. And the problem is that there's a challenge to that based on sovereignty. And the challenge says that the whole concept of Native American sovereignty is based on race, and so that it's prohibited by the 14th Amendment, which is, absolutely insane, because membership in a tribe is not race-based, it's culturally based, and there's people in tribes that literally have zero Native American blood in them.
Well, they're sovereign nations,
Right, but except if this court case goes the wrong way, Native American sovereignty will be completely repealed.
Oh, Lord.
And the reason that's bad environmentally is that
Horatio Humphrey Jr.
Yeah, a lot of Native American tribes are deeply involved in a lot of these court cases to protect the environment.
Which is probably the point of the whole thing.
And that's why actually it's being bankrolled by a lot of oil companies and a lot of...
no surprise.
Yeah, a lot of big corporations that don't want to see sovereignty stand in the way of their destruction of the environment. So let's pray that one goes the right way. That's it. That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. This is Joe DeMar.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
No. I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun